Imagine for a moment, what if the greatest obstacle between you and true power wasn't the lack of money, connections, or opportunities, but something far more intimate and disturbing? Carl Jung, the revolutionary psychoanalyst who unraveled the mysteries of the human mind, discovered something that would forever change our understanding of personal mastery and success. When you stop yielding to the most primitive impulses of addiction, something extraordinary happens. The world literally bends before you. This isn't mysticism, it's deep psychology. Jung observed that men and women who managed to master their compulsive desires developed an almost supernatural magnetic force, a presence that commanded respect, attracted opportunities, and literally made circumstances align in their favor. But why does this happen? And how can you use this transformative discovery to revolutionize your own life? Prepare yourself for a journey that will challenge everything you believe about power, control, and personal achievement. Carl Jung stumbled upon one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets during his decades studying the human psyche, the internal alchemy that transforms addiction into your greatest power. Have you ever felt like a puppet on strings, being pulled by forces you can't even see? That's exactly what happens when addiction takes hold of your life. The most dangerous prison isn't made of iron bars. It's built from habits that whisper sweet promises while silently stealing your freedom. Every morning, millions of people wake up with the same thought: today will be different. Yet by nightfall, they find themselves back in the same patterns, wondering where their willpower went. What Jung understood before anyone else was that addiction isn't simply about the substance or behavior itself. It's about what that addiction represents in your deeper mind. Behind every compulsive action lies a shadow, parts of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or never fully acknowledged. These shadows don't disappear just because we ignore them. Instead, they grow stronger in the darkness, emerging disguised as cravings that seem impossible to resist. Think about the last time you gave in to your addiction. It wasn't a rational choice, was it? Something else took over. An almost primal force that bypassed your conscious mind. Jung called this possession, when an unconscious complex gains so much energy that it temporarily takes control of your personality. This isn't weakness. It's what happens when powerful forces in your unconscious mind remain unaddressed. Your addiction isn't random. It speaks a psychological language all its own. The specific thing you crave, whether it's alcohol, validation on social media, gambling, or even workaholism, is precisely matched to the empty spaces in your psyche. Each compulsion is attempting to fill a specific psychological need, albeit in a distorted, ultimately self-defeating way. The modern world makes this invisible prison even more inescapable. We're surrounded by triggers designed by experts to bypass our rational minds. Your phone, social media, fast food, online shopping, these aren't just products. They're sophisticated systems engineered to create and maintain addictive patterns. The average person faces more temptation in a single day than our ancestors encountered in months. But here's what makes this prison truly insidious. It convinces you that you need it. The addiction becomes part of your identity. You might think, this is just who I am, or I can't function without this. Jung discovered that these beliefs are part of the addiction's defense system, a way for the complex to protect itself from being integrated into consciousness. The cost of this invisible imprisonment extends far beyond the obvious. Yes, addiction steals your time, money, and health, but the deeper price is your potential. Every moment spent in the grip of compulsion is energy diverted from your true purpose. Jung observed that addiction creates a dangerous substitute for authentic living, a counterfeit experience that feels like fulfillment but leaves you emptier than before. Most troubling is how addiction disconnects you from your inner guidance system. Jung emphasized the importance of what he called the self, the organizing center of the entire personality that guides us toward wholeness. When addiction takes control, this connection weakens. Decisions that once would have felt clearly right or wrong become blurred. Your moral compass spins without finding true north. Think of addiction as a parasite that gradually takes over its host. At first it's small, barely noticeable. You're still in control. But with each surrender it grows stronger while you grow weaker. The space between you and your authentic self widens until you barely recognize the person in the mirror. This isn't just psychological theory. It's the lived experience of millions who wake up one day wondering how they wandered so far from who they meant to become. The first step toward freedom is simply recognizing the prison for what it is. Not making excuses, not blaming circumstances, but seeing with clear eyes how these patterns have limited your life and recognizing that something much greater awaits beyond these invisible walls. This recognition is what Jung called the beginning of wisdom, when unconscious patterns first enter the light of consciousness. The human mind is like an iceberg. The small portion visible above water represents our conscious awareness, while the vast mass hidden beneath the surface holds our unconscious mind. This was Jung's revolutionary insight. Within this underwater realm lies what he called the shadow, all the parts of ourselves we've rejected, denied, or never developed. These aren't just random aspects, they're the exact opposite of the identity we present to the world. Your shadow isn't evil, it's simply unknown to you. The perfect employee harbors secret resentment. The caring parent occasionally dreams of freedom from responsibility. The social activist privately struggles with prejudice. Jung discovered that the more rigid your conscious identity, the more powerful your shadow becomes. And here's where addiction enters the picture. Those compulsions that seem to control your life are often direct expressions of your shadow demanding attention. When you repeatedly push something into the shadow, it doesn't disappear. It gains energy. The emotions and needs you refuse to acknowledge don't vanish. They transform. The anger you never express becomes passive-aggressive behavior. The vulnerability you can't admit becomes a need for numbing substances. The grief you haven't processed becomes compulsive eating or shopping. Your addiction is speaking the language of your shadow, trying to communicate what you haven't been willing to hear. Jung observed a fascinating pattern in his patients. The things people were most addicted to often represented qualities they most deeply denied in themselves. The rigid perfectionist becomes alcoholic, seeking the fluid, boundaryless state they cannot otherwise allow. The person terrified of intimacy becomes sexually compulsive, approaching connection only through the safety of temporary encounters. Your specific addiction isn't random. It's psychologically precise. The relationship between shadow and addiction creates a dangerous cycle. Each time you act on your compulsion, you temporarily relieve the pressure from your shadow. The denied parts get a moment of expression, but in a distorted form that ultimately strengthens their hold. It's like scratching a rash, momentary relief that makes the underlying condition worse. Most approaches to addiction focus entirely on stopping the behavior. While important, Jung recognized this wasn't enough. Without addressing the shadow material powering the addiction, you're merely treating symptoms while the underlying cause grows stronger. This explains why many people who overcome one addiction simply develop another. Different expression, same shadow. The true path forward requires courage few are willing to muster, turning toward your shadow rather than away from it. This means asking what your addiction is trying to tell you. What emotions does it help you avoid? What needs does it attempt to fulfill? What parts of yourself has it allowed you to express that otherwise remain hidden? These aren't comfortable questions, but they lead to lasting transformation rather than temporary control. Jung discovered something remarkable about this process. When people consciously engaged with their shadow instead of being unconsciously controlled by it, the compulsive quality of their behaviors began to diminish. The shadow's energy wasn't eliminated, it was transformed. The same passion that fueled addiction could power creativity, connection, and purpose when consciously integrated. This integration process connects directly to our next stage of transformation. Once you begin to recognize how your addictions represent aspects of your shadow, you reach what Jung called the turning point, the moment when conscious choice becomes possible. No longer purely reactive to unconscious forces, you stand at the threshold of a new kind of power. The very energy that once controlled you becomes available for conscious direction. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the Sim Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. The shadow's integration doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of bringing light to darkness, making the unconscious conscious. Each time you pause before acting on compulsion and ask what deeper need is present, you're engaging in this transformative work. Each moment of awareness creates space between trigger and response, the exact space where freedom becomes possible and where your journey toward true power begins. Have you ever noticed how the darkest moment of night comes just before dawn? This same pattern appears in our battle with addiction. Jung discovered something remarkable about the recovery process. There's a specific moment when everything changes. It doesn't happen gradually. It happens in an instant. Though the preparation for that instant may take years, this turning point often arrives when you least expect it. Many people imagine that overcoming addiction requires ever-increasing willpower, like pushing a boulder uphill. But Jung observed something completely different. The real breakthrough comes not from fighting harder, but from a profound shift in perspective. A moment of surrender that paradoxically becomes the foundation of true power. What makes this moment so transformative? It begins with complete honesty. No more hiding, no more excuses, no more partial admissions. Jung noted that nothing blocks psychological growth more effectively than self-deception. When you finally face the full reality of your addiction, not just its external consequences, but its control over your inner life, something fundamental changes. The very act of bringing something fully into consciousness alters its nature. Many mistake this surrender for weakness, but it's actually the opposite. Think about how much energy you've spent maintaining the illusion of control, the constant justifications, the elaborate systems to hide your behavior from others, the mental gymnastics to convince yourself that tomorrow will be different. When you finally stop this exhausting charade, enormous psychological energy becomes available for actual transformation. Jung discovered that this turning point often involves what he called hitting the bottom, a moment when the pain of continuing becomes greater than the fear of change. This doesn't necessarily mean external disaster. Many people reach this turning point while their lives still appear successful on the outside. The bottom is psychological, the moment when you can no longer bear the gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. Something mysterious happens in this moment of surrender. Jung described it as the ego, your conscious self, finally recognizing its limitations and opening to something larger. He observed that lasting recovery rarely came from ego strength alone. It required connection to what he called the self, the deeper organizing center of the entire personality. This connection often arrives as an unexpected gift precisely when you admit your own powerlessness. The turning point transforms your relationship with addiction in unexpected ways. Before, your addiction was something you desperately wanted but tried to resist. After, you begin to see it clearly for what it is, not the solution, but the problem. This shift doesn't happen through arguments or logic, it happens through experience. The direct recognition that what once seemed to offer relief now brings only suffering. The addiction loses its power to deceive. What makes this moment so precious is that it can't be manufactured. You can't fake surrender. You can't strategically plan for ego collapse. It happens only when you've exhausted every other option, when you've tried controlling, moderating, shifting to healthier alternatives, and all the other ways we try to maintain our addictions while minimizing their costs. The turning point arrives when you finally accept that none of these half measures will ever work. Once this shift occurs, something that seemed impossible becomes surprisingly natural. The energy that was split between craving and resistance now flows in a single direction. Jung noted that many people describe this as finally feeling whole rather than divided against themselves. The inner war that consumed so much energy ceases, not because either side won, but because you're no longer on the battlefield at all. This turning point connects directly to the next stage of transformation. Once the surrender happens, a new kind of alchemy begins. The very forces that once drove your addiction become available for conscious creation. The passion that fueled compulsion can power purpose. The sensitivity that led you to seek numbing can become a source of connection and empathy. Nothing is lost, everything is transformed. Ancient alchemists spent centuries trying to transform lead into gold. Though they failed at literal transformation, Jung recognized that they had accidentally developed a perfect metaphor for the psychological process of transformation. The lead of addiction, heavy, dull, and poisonous, can indeed be transformed into the gold of creative purpose through an inner alchemy that changes not the substance, but its form and direction. This transformation begins with a radical realization. The energy behind your addiction isn't inherently destructive. It's neutral power that has been channeled in harmful ways. The intense focus a gaming addict brings to virtual worlds. The relief from inattention that alcohol temporarily provides. The connection to pleasure that drives sexual compulsion. These energies themselves aren't the problem. It's their expression and direction that create suffering. Jung discovered that successful recovery doesn't mean eliminating these energies. It means redirecting them. The same passionate intensity that once fueled addiction can drive artistic creation, build businesses, strengthen relationships, or deepen spiritual practice. Nothing needs to be destroyed. Everything can be repurposed. This understanding changes recovery from a process of loss to one of redirection and gain. The first step in this alchemical process is containment. Just as chemical transformation requires a sealed vessel to contain powerful reactions, psychological transformation needs boundaries. Clear, firm decisions about what behaviors are no longer acceptable create the container for change. Without this containment, energy continues to leak out through compulsive actions, never building enough pressure for transformation. Once contained, this energy seeks new channels of expression. This is when many people experience surprising creative urges. The person who once couldn't go a day without drinking suddenly finds themselves writing poetry. The former social media addict discovers a passion for gardening. The recovered workaholic develops deep friendships. Jung noted these weren't random substitutions, but meaningful redirections of the same fundamental energies. What makes this process truly alchemical is that nothing is wasted. Even the suffering of addiction becomes valuable. The sensitivity that made you vulnerable to addiction becomes compassion for others. The self-knowledge gained through recovery becomes wisdom. The humility learned through failure becomes authentic strength. As Jung put it, there is no coming to consciousness without pain, but that pain itself becomes part of the gold. This transformation isn't just psychological, it manifests physically. People who redirect addictive energy often describe a tangible sense of vitality returning. Sleep improves, chronic pain diminishes, mental clarity increases. Jung observed that addiction creates a state of fragmentation, with energy scattered across compulsive patterns. As integration happens, this energy consolidates, creating a palpable sense of wholeness and presence. The most profound aspect of this alchemy involves purpose. Many people discover that their addiction was a distorted attempt to fill an emptiness that can only truly be addressed through meaning. Jung believed that much of modern addiction stems from spiritual hunger in a materialistic world. As recovery progresses, questions of purpose become central. Not, how do I stop this behavior, but what am I here to create? This redirection of energy creates something Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to support your new direction. Opportunities appear. Helpful people enter your life. Resources become available. It's as if the world itself responds to your transformation. Jung didn't view this as supernatural, but as evidence of a deeper order connecting inner and outer reality, an order that becomes visible only when inner fragmentation heals. The ultimate alchemy happens when your greatest weakness becomes your greatest strength. The sensitivity that made you vulnerable becomes your gift to others. The intense focus that drove compulsion fuels achievement. The emptiness that led to addiction opens into spiritual depth. Jung observed this pattern repeatedly. What wounded you most deeply becomes, when transformed, your unique offering to the world. This transformation connects directly to our next stage. As inner alchemy progresses, something unexpected begins to happen. The outer world seems to change in response to your inner shift. Circumstances that once triggered addiction become opportunities for growth. People who enabled your patterns either change or fade from your life. A new kind of magnetic power emerges, one that doesn't just redirect your energy, but begins to shape reality itself. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to have an almost magical ability to attract opportunities? They don't chase success, it comes to them. Doors open without effort. The right connections appear at exactly the right moment. Jung observed this phenomenon repeatedly among those who had mastered their addictions and discovered something surprising. This wasn't coincidence or luck. It was the natural result of a psychological transformation that literally changes how you interact with reality. When you stop giving in to addiction, something shifts in how others perceive you. The change begins subtly. People start listening more carefully when you speak. They remember commitments they've made to you. They think of you when opportunities arise. This isn't imagination. It's a response to the authentic presence that develops when you're no longer divided against yourself. Jung noted that others unconsciously sense this integration, responding to it with increased respect and attention. This new magnetic quality doesn't come from trying to impress others. Quite the opposite. It emerges when you stop needing their approval. Addiction creates a hidden dependency, not just on substances or behaviors, but on external validation. You become hypersensitive to how others see you, constantly adjusting your mask to maintain their good opinion. When addiction loses its grip, this desperate need for approval falls away. Paradoxically, this makes others more drawn to you, not less. The workplace offers clear evidence of this transformation. The same person who once struggled with deadlines, avoided difficult conversations, and sought constant reassurance suddenly becomes remarkably effective. Projects complete on time, conflicts resolved directly, leadership emerges naturally. Jung recognized that this increased effectiveness stems from energy conservation. When you're not wasting mental and emotional resources managing addiction, extraordinary capacity becomes available for creation and connection. Financial circumstances often shift in unexpected ways. Money that once disappeared into the black hole of addiction becomes available for investment. But something even more interesting happens. New income sources appear. The promotion that seemed out of reach. The business opportunity that arrives unexpectedly, the perfect job opening. Jung observed that this wasn't mere coincidence, but a result of increased presence and capacity. You're simply able to recognize and act on opportunities that were always there, but previously invisible to your addiction-clouded perception. Relationships transform dramatically during this phase. The same people who once enabled your addiction either adapt to your new boundaries or naturally fade from your life. More surprisingly, new relationships appear that support your growth. Mentors offer guidance, collaborators propose partnerships, friends provide genuine connection. Jung called this psychological attraction, the tendency to draw people into your life who match your current psychological state. As your inner world changes, your outer connections naturally realign. Even physical spaces respond to your transformation. The home that once felt like a prison becomes a sanctuary. Environments that triggered addiction lose their power. New spaces that support your growth seemingly invite you in. Jung noted that this wasn't mystical but practical. Your changed perception and behavior create different interactions with your surroundings. You notice different details, make different choices, and naturally create environments that reflect your inner shift. Perhaps most remarkable is how challenges that once seemed insurmountable become manageable. The same stresses that drove you to addiction become opportunities for growth. The difficult conversation you avoided for years happens naturally and resolves cleanly. The financial problem that seemed hopeless reveals an unexpected solution. Jung observed that this increased resilience comes from facing rather than fleeing discomfort. Each time you move toward challenge rather than escaping through addiction, your capacity expands. This isn't just psychological, it's practical. Concrete opportunities appear. The job interview that leads to advancement, the chance meeting that creates a business partnership, the unexpected invitation that opens a new path. Jung described this as preparedness meeting opportunity. Your transformed state allows you to recognize and act on possibilities that addiction would have hidden or sabotaged. The world hasn't changed. Your relationship to it has. The most profound shift happens in your sense of timing. Addiction creates perpetual urgency. Everything feels like it must happen immediately or not at all. When this compulsion fades, natural timing emerges. You develop an intuitive sense of when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to push forward and when to rest. This aligned timing creates a sense that the world itself is cooperating with your intentions, bending toward your authentic purpose. This transformation of external circumstances connects directly to our final stage. As the world seems to bend in response to your new presence, something even deeper begins to emerge. You move beyond merely resisting addiction to creating a life so compelling that addiction loses all appeal. This isn't just freedom from compulsion. It's the discovery of purpose so authentic that it makes previous attachments seem shallow by comparison. The final transformation is both simpler and more profound than all that came before. You reach a point where you no longer think about resisting addiction, you simply live beyond it. The energy once spent fighting compulsion now flows naturally toward creation. Jung observed this state in his patients who achieved complete recovery. They didn't become perfect or struggle-free, but their relationship with difficulty fundamentally changed. Challenges became invitations rather than threats. This stage begins with a surprising realization. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Jung discovered that lasting recovery happens when you build a life rich with meaningful relationships, to others, to work that matters, to your authentic self, and to something larger than yourself. These connections aren't just nice additions to recovery, they're its foundation. The more deeply connected you become, the less appeal addiction holds. A remarkable shift in identity occurs during this phase. You no longer define yourself by what you've overcome. Being in recovery or sober ceases to be your primary identity. Instead, you simply become more fully yourself, the person you were always meant to be before addiction intervened. Jung noted that this represents true psychological maturity, moving beyond defining yourself by what you resist to knowing yourself by what you create. Your relationship with pleasure transforms completely. Addiction offers intense but shallow pleasure that diminishes over time, requiring ever-increasing stimulation. Beyond addiction, you discover subtler but deeper satisfactions that grow rather than diminish with repetition. The joy of creative flow, the warmth of authentic connection, the peace of aligned purpose. These pleasures lack the initial intensity of addiction, but offer something addiction never could: lasting fulfillment that builds rather than depletes. Decision-making becomes remarkably clear in this stage. Without the fog of addiction, you develop what Jung called instinctive wisdom, an ability to recognize what truly serves your wholeness. Choices that once seemed confusing become obvious. Paths that addiction would have hidden appear clearly. This clarity isn't intellectual, it's visceral. Your body itself begins to guide you toward health and away from harm through sensations of expansion or constriction that precede conscious thought. The most profound change happens in your relationship with pain. Addiction functions primarily as pain avoidance, a way to escape discomfort, boredom, anxiety, grief, or loneliness. Beyond addiction, you develop capacity to move toward rather than away from difficult emotions. You discover that pain, fully experienced, transforms rather than destroys. Jung observed that this willingness to face rather than flee suffering creates extraordinary psychological strength, not the brittle force of willpower, but the supple resilience of acceptance. Your creative capacities expand dramatically during this phase. Ideas flow more easily. Solutions appear to problems that once seemed unsolvable. Artistic expression deepens. Jung recognized that this increased creativity comes from integration. When conscious and unconscious minds work together rather than against each other, genuine innovation becomes natural. The energy once trapped in the cycle of craving and resistance becomes available for imagination and implementation. Relationships deepen in ways that might have seemed impossible during addiction. The same person who once couldn't bear vulnerability now creates connections based on authentic sharing. Conflicts that once triggered escape now become opportunities for greater understanding. Jung noted that this transformation stems from a fundamental shift. You no longer use others to manage your emotional state. This frees relationships from manipulation and allows genuine intimacy to develop. Perhaps most surprising is how your past transforms. The same history that once seemed like nothing but shame and regret becomes a source of wisdom and compassion. Jung called this redemption of the past, not erasing what happened, but finding its meaning and value. Your struggles with addiction, fully integrated, become the very experiences that allow you to connect with and help others. Nothing is wasted when properly understood. The ultimate freedom comes when you recognize that you were never truly fighting addiction itself. You were fighting a limited understanding of who you are. Jung described addiction as a spiritual illness, not in any religious sense, but as a fundamental disconnection from the fullness of your own nature. The journey beyond addiction isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been beneath the layers of compulsion and fear. This completion brings us full circle to where we began. The world that once seemed to imprison you through addiction now responds to your authentic presence with synchronicity and support. The energy that once drove compulsion now powers creation. The sensitivity that made you vulnerable becomes your greatest strength. As Jung discovered, when you stop giving in to addiction, something remarkable happens. Not just recovery from illness, but discovery of a power that was waiting within you all along.